Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to discuss some important MCQs of pediatric orthopedic surgery. I am Dr. Mohammed Bilal. Let's start our quiz. A 6-year-old girl who has displaced supracondylar humerus fracture lateral entry pin fixation with 2 pins was performed. Intraoperative internal rotation stress testing demonstrate instability of the medial column with a lateral rotation percentage of 61%. To improve rotational stability of the fracture, what is the best next step? Option A, immobilize with a long arm cast. Option B, remove pins, repeat reduction maneuvers and replace the pins. Option C, supplemental fixation with a third lateral entry pin or a medial entry pin. And option D, revise fixation with the larger diameter pins. So here the correct answer is option C, supplemental fixation with a third lateral entry pin or a medial entry pin. You see, that was a supracondylar humerus fracture which was fixed with two wires, and you see that there is a rotational instability, and you can appreciate the lateral rotation percentage of about 61%. That was a Gartland 3 supracondylar humerus fracture. Supracondylar humerus fracture may be rotationally unstable after pin fixation. Gordon and associate described the radiographic changes in the rotational alignment of a supracondylar humerus fracture after pin fixation as the lateral rotation percentage. So what is the lateral rotation percentage? This is determined on the lateral radiographic image and is defined as the width of the medial column displacement divided by the width of the humerus distal to fracture site multiplied by 100. The image reveals the medial column has displaced anteriorly with the internal rotation stress test. Supplemental fixation with third lateral entry pin or a medial entry pin can provide rotational stability of the fracture. Here now the stability has improved and the lateral rotation percentage that was previously 61% has much improved now. A 5-year-old boy is being evaluated after 4 days of refusal to walk, fever to 101.6 degree Fahrenheit and a left hip pain. The patient prefers to maintain the hip in extension. Lab evaluation demonstrate a CRP level of 160 and platelets count 200,000. A left hip effusion is noted on ultrasonography. In addition to aspiration and synovial fluid analysis of the hip joint, what is the best next step in the management? Option A, DVT scan. Option B, MRI pelvis. Option C, bone scan. And option D, operative debridement. So here the correct answer is option B, which is MRI pelvis. The clinical picture is concerning for a musculoskeletal infection with the hip pain, fever, and elevated CRP. Septic arthritis is a possibility given the hip effusion. However, the effusion may be reactive to an adjacent focus of infection. With septic arthritis of the hip, the limb is typically held in flexion, abduction, and external rotation. An MRI of the pelvis is the imaging modality that would best evaluate for adjacent osteomyelitis or pyomyositis. Failure to identify a distinct adjacent infection may result in inadequate initial treatment, worsening of the illness, and extended length of stay and return to the operative room. A 7-year-old boy is treated for a femoral shaft fracture with a flexible intramedullary nailing. At 2 years post-operative follow-up, 1.5 cm overgrowth of the injured side is noted. Which factor increases the risk of overgrowth? Option A, length stable fracture pattern and nail canal diameter ratio less than 0.8. Option B, length stable fracture pattern and nail canal diameter ratio more than 0.8. Option C, length unstable fracture pattern and nail canal diameter ratio less than 0.8. And option D, length unstable fracture pattern and nail canal diameter ratio more than 0.8. So here the correct answer is option C, length unstable fracture pattern and nail canal diameter ratio less than 0.8. The incidence of LLD following IM nailing of femoral shaft fracture ranges from 8% to 20% related to either to overgrowth or shortening through the fracture site. Overgrowth may be related to greater fracture instability and hyperemia, which stimulates the physis. Length unstable fracture pattern and decreased canal fill by the flexible nail, that is nail canal diameter ratio less than 0.8, have both been associated with the femoral overgrowth. A 14-year-old girl who is being evaluated for a SOSA-related injury. Examination of the right knee reveals full motion, no effusion, and a stable ligamentous examination. Skin examination demonstrates numerous light-brown macules. The gene product responsible for this patient disorder is likely to be option A, GS alpha protein, option B, isocitrate dehydrogenase, option C, neurofibromin, and option D, EXT glycosyl transferase. So here the correct answer is option C, which is neurofibromin. If you see, there are multiple lytic lesion in the metaphyseal area of the tibia. The radiographs show multiple cortically based, well circumscribed, lucent lesion consistent with non-ossifying fibroma. Jaffe-Campanashi syndrome, that is JCS, is classically described as the presence of multiple non-ossifying fibroma of the long bones, mandibular joint cell lesion, and cephalae macules in individuals without neurofibroma. In recent study of a patient with JCS, most had pathogenic germline NF1 mutation, suggesting that JCS patient may actually have neurofibromatosis type 1. The gene product of NF1 is neurofibromine. McQueen-Albright syndrome is defined by the triad of fibrous dysplasia of the bone, cephalae, skin spots, and precocious puberty. The disease results from mutation of the GNAS gene, which encodes the CMP regulating protein, that is GS alpha. Ollier disease and Maffucci syndrome are both characterized by multiple enchondromas, while Maffucci syndrome is accompanied by soft tissue hemangiomas. The conditions are characterized by mutation in the IDH1 or IDH2 genes, which encodes isocitrate dehydrogenase. Multiple hereditary exostosis is characterized by multiple osteochondromas. MHE is primarily caused by mutation in the EXT1 or EXT2 genes, which encode EXT glycosyl transferase. An 8-year-old boy with a distal femoral osteomyelitis has a MRSA bacteremia and a vancomycin infusion is started. He develops a mild erythematous pruritic rash over his face, neck, and upper torso. No other symptoms are noted and vital signs remain normal. The infusion is stopped. The most appropriate next step is to option A, restart the infusion of a dose of rifampicin. Option B, wait for 2 hours and restart the infusion at 50% of the original rate. Option C, start linezolid, and option D, administer diphenhydramine and ranitidine. So this is a classical presentation of a Redman syndrome, and this is the option which is correct here is administration of antihistamine and ranitidine. The patient is manifesting as a Redman syndrome and anaphylactide reaction, the most frequent adverse reaction to IV vancomycin. The most severe reaction occur in a patient less than 40 years of age, particularly in children. When Redman syndrome occurs, the infusion should be immediately discontinued. Mild cases can be treated with antihistamines such as diphenhydramine and ranitidine. A 9-year-old boy who has a new wound of the posterior medial heel without a recent injury or fever. He had 2 months history of heel pain and has been treated for calcaneal apophysitis with the walking boot, that is Sever's disease. Complete blood count, CRP level, and ESR are normal. What is the best next step? Option A, iliac crust aspiration. Option B, biopsy and debridement. Option C, bone scan, and option D, skeletal survey. So here the correct answer is option B, that is biopsy and debridement. The patient has chronic calcaneal osteomyelitis. Pediatric calcaneal osteomyelitis may follow an indolent course with a delay in the diagnosis. Given the draining wound, chronic radiographic changes, and MRI evidence of abscess, operative biopsy and debridement is the next step. A 14-year-old male across the country runner is being evaluated for exercise-induced leg pain. The pain is localized along the distal two-thirds of the posterior medial tibia. Radiographs are normal. What is the likely to be the greatest risk factor for this condition? Option A, greater hip internal rotation. Option B, increased BMI. Option C, excessive foot supination, and option D, reduced dorsiflexor muscles endurance. So here the correct answer is option B, that is increased body mass index, because the condition is here is medial tibial stress syndrome, which is exercise induced pain localized to the distal two-thirds of the posterior medial tibia. Reported risk factors include female sex, greater body mass index, increased navicular drop, or prior use of orthotics, previous running injury, reduced running experience, and greater hip external rotation. Reduced plantar flexor muscle endurance has been associated with the medial tibial stress syndrome in adults. A 12-month-old boy who has a neck injury after motor vehicle accident. He is neurologically intact without any other injuries. Following successful close reduction of the fracture, what is the best next step in the management? Option A, Immobilization in a cervical collar. Option B. Immobilization in a Minvira cast or hollow cast. Option C. Anterior odontite fixation, and option D. Posterior C1 and C2 instrumented orthodesis. So here uh, option B is the correct because the patient has sustained a displaced odontite fracture through the dentocentral synchondrosis. Reduction of the fracture can usually be achieved by extending the neck under fluoroscopic control. An irreducible fracture may be successfully treated by transoral digital manipulation. After close reduction, immobilization in Minvera cast or hollow west are good options. A cervical collar will not adequately immobilize the upper cervical spine to maintain the reduction of an unstable odontite fracture. Anterior odontite fixation or a posterior C1 C2 instrumented orthodesis should be reserved for irreducible fracture or a rare pediatric odontite fracture non-union. A 10-year-old girl who injured her elbow in an all-terrain vehicle accident. Figure shows of the elbow following close manipulation. What is the best next step in the management? Option A. Immobilization in a long arm cast. Option B. Percutaneous reduction and pin fixation if required. Option C. Open reduction and pin fixation if required. And option D. Open reduction and screw plate fixation. So the pathology is here, that is the patient has a displaced radial head fracture. So the correct answer is percutaneous reduction and pin fixation if required. The patient has sustained displaced radial neck fracture. Generally acceptable alignment of a pediatric radial neck fracture is considered to be less than 30% of translation and less than 30 degree of angulation. So you will have to remember the figure 30 if you are going to address the acceptable alignment of the radial neck fracture. After close manipulation, the current alignment is unacceptable and long arm casting without further treatment is not recommended. The next step in the management of this injury is an attempt to percutaneous reduction of the fracture with the Steinmann pin. Open reduction should be performed only if fracture cannot be reduced to an acceptable position with the closed or percutaneous method due to the association of open reduction with greater stiffness and poor outcomes. A 13-year-old male cross-country runner who has had a vague posterior thigh pain for more than a year. Pain is worsening at night than while running. History is negative for trauma, fevers, or constitutional signs or symptoms. Pain is relieved with NSAIDs, lab and inflammatory markers are normal. What is the best next step for this patient? Option A CT guided biopsy to confirm diagnosis and enable prognostic prediction. Option B. Continuous symptomatic management with NSAID therapy with expected resolution of the symptom. Option C. Activity restriction and touch down weight bearing with potential need for stress fracture stabilization. And option D. Empiric antibiotic with expectant resolution of lesion after 6 weeks of therapy. So here the correct answer is option B, continued symptomatic management with NSAID therapy with expected resolution of symptom. So the pathology is lying here, that is an osteoid osteoma. Plain frame CT and MRI evidence of an intracortical lucency less than 1.5 cm diameter consistent with the benign nidus of an osteoid osteoma. Open biopsy is not required as the imaging findings are pathognomic. In this case, symptoms are chronic and well controlled with NSAIDs, thus more aggressive intervention is not indicated. The natural history of untreated osteoid osteoma is often for spontaneous resolution in the next 2 to 3 years. A 5-year-old boy who had a progressive right knee pain and swelling, fever to 38.4 degrees centigrade and refusal to wear bait for the past several days. Lab evaluation reveals hematocrit 29.9, WBC count 17.5 with a 92% neutrophils on differential count. ESR 48 and CRP of 8.2. What is the best next course of action? Option A. Whole body bone scan, CT chest, open biopsy and hematology oncology consultation. Option B. Empiric IV antibiotics and serial inflammatory markers to assess response. Option C. Surgical irrigation and drainage of the right distal femur. And option D. Arthroscopic lavage of the right knee. So here the correct answer is option C, surgical irrigation and drainage of the right distal femur. The patient presents with acute hematogenous osteomyelitis, leukocytosis with left-shaped fever, elevated acute phase reactants, and large circumferential ring-enhancing subperiosteal and intraosseous abscess on MRI are diagnostic. Empiric antibiotics with a close surveillance of clinical and laboratory response is appropriate if diagnosis is early in disease course when no drainable abscess is identified. However, the abscesses in this case must be surgically irrigated and debrided to decrease local infection burden and enable effective antibiotic therapy. A limping 13-year-old boy is seen in emergency department several months after returning from a summer camp complaining of 5 days of progressive knee swelling and a low-grade fever. The patient does not recall a rash or tick bite but notes that several friends had ticks removed while at camp. A physical examination reveals a large right knee fusion, moderately noxious arc of passive motion from 30 to 95 degree and a fever of 38.1 degree centigrade. Lab evaluation evidences and WBC count of 12.3, ESR 42 and CRP 4.4. Knee aspiration obtains 40 cc of cloudy synovial fluid with a WBC count of 64,000 and 72% of polymorphonuclear cells. What is the best appropriate course of treatment? Option A, emergent arthroscopic lavage. Option B, observation and IV non-NSAIDs with repeat aspiration in the morning. Option C, emergent MRI with contrast of the right knee. And option D, serologic Lyme titer testing and initiation of doxycycline and NSAIDs. So here the correct answer is D, serologic Lyme titer testing and initiation of doxycycline and NSAIDs. And Lyme arthritis is also called pseudoseptic arthritis due to its similarities in presentation to a classical bacterial septic arthritis. As opposed to septic bacterial arthritis, Lyme arthritis progresses relatively slowly. Children often remain ambulatory and fevers are less likely to be more than 38.5 degrees centigrade. Synovial fluid counts are often more than 50,000, leading aspirate to be less useful in differentiating septic and pseudoseptic arthritis. However, neutrophil differential in Lyme arthritis is typically less than 90%. A 6-year-old boy who falls off a tire swing and sustains an isolated left femur fracture that is treated with a submuscular plating. He went on to an uneventful union and full return to activity without disability. Recommendation should include option A, implant removal given the high likelihood of requiring future hip arthroplasty. Option B, observation with the implant removal only if the patient is symptomatic in future. Option C, implant removal to minimize the risk of valgus deformity. And option D, implant retention to avoid potential morbidity of pathologic fracture following removal. So here the correct answer is option C, implant removal to minimize the risk of valgus deformity. Submuscular plating of a pediatric femur fracture is a reliable technique for length in unstable fracture in the 5 to 10 years old age group. Several reports have demonstrated a propensity for a late valgus development with contoured lateral plate adjacent to distal femur phases and recommend for routine implant removal following fracture union and remodeling prior to development of this sequelae, rather than observation and additional treatment once it occurs. A 16-year-old boy is being evaluated for cervical spine clearance 1 week after he underwent playing basketball and lands striking the back of his head with hyperflexion force on his neck. He had immediate complaints of isolated midline neck pain and tenderness. Plain radiograph of the cervical spine and neurological examination was normal at the time of injury, and the patient was discharged home in a hard cervical collar. On examination in the office, the patient has resolution of neck pain with complaints of vague headache and difficulty concentrating in school. Supple active cervical range of motion maintained normal neurological examination and isolated left trapezial tenderness to palpation. Dynamic flexion extension lateral cervical radiographs are normal. What is the most appropriate next step? Option A, continuation of the rigid cervical collar and MRI cervical spine to rule out occult ligamentous injury. Option B, clinical and radiographic cervical spine clearance and clearance to return to athletics. Option C, physical therapy for persistent trapezial spasm and strain. And option D, clinical and radiographical cervical spine clearance and prompt travel to traumatic brain injury. So here the correct answer is option D, clinical and radiographic spine clearance, and prompt referral to traumatic brain injury.